Let's continue then this conversation as we look at what will it take to avoid another Marikana. In conversation with us, we have Thabisile Pumo, the Executive Vice President, Stakeholder Relations at Sibanye Stillwater, Philip Vilagazi, NUN Deputy President. We have Putuma Manyati, AMCU Regional Secretary, and next to him is Andries Nkume, who is the attorney for Marikana Miners. Thank you so much to you all for your time. I'm sure we were listening to the conversations that were taking place, and I'll come to you, Mr. Vilagazi. I'll just start with you. I mean, you're listening to the workers and you're listening to the widows. Briefly share with us your reflections ahead of tomorrow.
Bongiwe and the other members of the panel and the viewers at home, let's continue to give a message of condolences to survivors and families of those who lost their life on the day in question. To be honest, when personally I studied the Falam Commission, part of the commission from where I'm sitting is the area where there are concerns. Concerns in a sense that when one of the employees was saying, always NUM when this day comes, it's when they start to take it as a joke. It's not true. Things which relate to government and law are not as easy as the way we may think. And I must tell the public that when workers were brutally killed by police and when workers were killing each other before the 16th of August, they were members of NUM. And reality is that the NUM in electing leaders, it is about workers amongst themselves electing people of their choice. I must definitely put this one on record. What really happened then, you may understand, I'm the Deputy President now after 2017, but the report that we're getting is that indeed, workers had an element of dissatisfaction. Our point of departure on this issue is to say, is either we review the Falam Commission to be clear in terms of recommendation of what must happen to the victims, starting from widows, people who died before, and people who were killed after, because the killing went on. You can call the last killing was of Madiba Kaiser. And this thing tells us that of recent, it's a gentleman who was killed in CCMA, I just forgot his name. And this kind of thing says to us, well, when you come to the police themselves, the commissioner then, the commissioner now, we had a session. Everybody's referring in the commission to say, but what will be guiding us if the commission itself, it does not give some guidelines? All it does, it says police must be trained how to control the mass in terms of violence or in terms of strike.
And I'm going to come back to those in just a moment, because there are other recommendations that it makes, and I'm keen to hear on what your thoughts are on them. Sister Thabisile, when we look at a day like tomorrow, we're listening to the mine workers and they say that there's quite a lot that they are still reflecting on and they're not happy with. They say that yes, there has been a difference in their salaries, but they're concerned about the fact that right now there are retrenchments and there's still some issues that are making them unhappy as they go into the 10th year anniversary.
Thank you to you and the viewers at home and the other panelists. I think the issue of retrenchments is something we must clarify. The last retrenchment that happened was actually in 2019. You'll recall that Lonmin had, prior to our taking over, spoken about 12,000 jobs. With the many retrenchment avoidance measures that we took, the number actually reduced to less than 4,000 if you take away the fact that some people took voluntary packages. So at this point, as I'm speaking to you, in fact, Marikana is recruiting with our K4 project. So I'm not sure, maybe this is news from then, but as I'm speaking to you today, there is no retrenchment taking place.
And I'll come back to some of the other issues as they talk about the other measures and things that they would like to see. But for you, Mr. Manyati, one of the things that is quite evident on a day like tomorrow is that you see the families of those that were killed on the 16th of August, and you see some, not all, of the families of those that were killed on the 13th of August, and the other widows are still not part of the commemoration. It's 10 years tomorrow. Can we see widows like the widows of security guards, the widows of police officers also being part of this commemoration? If not, when can this happen so that everybody is potentially put on the same room and be able to grieve together?
Yeah, just to come in there, my understanding that death is death, irrespective of color, race, or religion, or wherever you come from. And pain is the same. Whoever lost the loved one there felt the same pain. There cannot be a situation that some people felt less pain and some more pain. If you lost a husband, you lost a husband. And over the years, we've been trying hard to really reach out and make sure that this event covers that. And evident to that, you will see that when we built houses, we did not only single out AMCO members. Everybody who lost a loved one there, we actually built a house for them. And we are continuing to actually reach out. The problem is that the government interferes and come in and make sure that those stakeholders, they don't agree on anything. But there's still hope. There's still hope because it's not a big group. It's just a minority group here, 2 security guards, and some of those that died before the actual massacre of the 34 workers. That is doable. It's just a question of willingness from all sides. It must not be on the side of AMCO only.
Andries, I'm listening to what Mr. Manyathi is talking about, and I cannot help but think of the 2 gentlemen that we spoke to here. Their anger is still very much palpable. You're dealing with these mine workers 10 years on, who some of them are still wanting and waiting for the process of compensation to wrap up. Let's talk about the anger that they are still feeling as your clients going into tomorrow.
Thanks, Bongi, for having us, and I think I should greet my fellow panelists. Look, I think the issue that's raised by Mr. Manyathi should be emphasized to say when we arrived at Marikana, it was not more about who died when, but it was for the fact that we arrived there to give legal advice, to give legal assistance. Now, we assisted and took instructions from people, even those that passed on before the 16th, to this day, only later to realize that there is a same grouping of laborers of the mining company that were accused of killing their own brethren. And it was that said, ethically, legally, there's no way in which we can represent the 2 essential sides. But the story is the same, insofar as that being of laborers that felt that they were being abused and not receiving sufficient earnings, and therefore they went to their employer to seek better wages. To this day, I can tell you, for the fact that government is not seeking to give assistance, insofar as settling the claims, insofar as even an apology by all those that have been involved, coming through to say, let's have a reconciliatory process, let's sit together and see how best we deal with the Marikana situation. So that, to this day, in my view, is the cause of the whole pain.
Where are you missing each other with the Solicitor General? Because there does seem to, when you listen to him, be a willingness to resolve this matter, and now some of these cases are before the courts, and it's so that there's an umpire involved because you're not finding each other. Where are you missing each other as the parties?
Look, I think he stated now with the recent press briefing, he stated that it's PR, public relations. In our view, it's a stunt, and our thinking is that had this been more genuine from government's side, we would have long said, even before we issued summons in 2015, we would have long said, even before we approached the DJP and said, we're looking for dates to settle the Marikana matters. So to the extent that we hope he is genuine by saying that we need to sit down, we will still be willing to sit down with him and say, how best we settle these matters.
So Sabsile, we've seen Lonmin, in fact, at the time promising houses. Sibanye comes in, and we're seeing, some of the workers moving in to some of these houses that you've now made available for them, which is part of what, some of them have been crying about. And you speak to others and they tell you how grateful they are that they now have shelter that is provided for by the mine. Let's talk very briefly about the journey that Sibanye has traveled from then to now in order to make sure that some of these, service level agreements are being adhered to.
So the journey that we've undertaken was really focused on the families, because when we arrived, the pain was palpable. So we set out to not only speak to them, we visited their homes, Eastern Cape, Lesotho, had lots of conversations with them. As I'm speaking to you now, the families themselves have set up a task team where they are driving the process of healing, of closure, looking at the 6 issues that they identified in May. In addition, we met the children of the deceased in a youth camp to just also understand what are some of the challenges they're dealing with, because as part of the 1608 Trust, which was established before we arrived, we do take care of their educational needs. The children themselves have also formed a task team where they were very clear that if we are to help them, whether it's Sibanye, other stakeholders, can we not do this without them? So you would begin to see that any program that we deliver, the family members are leading, we are hearing them, and what we wanted to do as Tubanye, because we were not there when the tragedy happens, was to make sure that we don't assume what they want, but we hear it and give them a voice, because everybody has spoken for them. And for the first time when we arrived, we then said, we don't know what happened, please speak in your own voices, so that when we give you support, we give you the kind of support we need. The journey is long, but we are hopeful that together with the families and the children and the other parties that want to be with them on this journey, we'll at least do right by the families, given that the 10 years has lapsed and there are some issues that remain unanswered.
You are being accused of not taking care of all the needs of the families. I'm sure you listened to Uxolani saying that the widows are struggling. Yes, you put them through schools. They do have other issues, and they believe that you are putting them in houses that are too far away from where they're supposed to be. At the same time, you must allow them to go back to the Eastern Cape and pay them the same amount of money that you would have paid to their husbands. How do you respond to that?
I think the issue of the houses must be clarified. There were 16 houses that were not completed in the process started by AMCU. When we engaged with the families, because we went to the Eastern Cape, we went to the Lesotho, some of the families decided that the widows can choose to stay closer to work. So the widows that are staying in Moinoi and even in Rustenburg, that was their choice. As I'm speaking to you, we are building the balance of the 8 houses, 4 in Lesotho, some in the Eastern Cape, some in Mpumalanga, some in the Northern Cape, and those are the choices that came about from the family. So it is untrue that we put them there. It was the choice of the widows and the families themselves.
Mr. Manyati, I'll come back to you, Mr. Velakazi, in just a moment. I've listened to what Mr. Velakazi says when it comes to the issue around the Falam Commission's report. There have been concerns that have been raised over the years that it didn't go far enough, particularly when you look at some of the murders. It says, further investigation instead of really identifying some of the culprits that should be apprehended. Do you think it was a waste of time?
Absolutely a waste of time. In fact, from AMCO we call it the Commission of Omission, because that commission missed an opportunity to actually tell us what happened and map the way forward. But because it was structured in such a way that it covered up those that were behind these killings, there was no way it could have achieved what we were expecting it to achieve. So I would really agree that we really need a serious commission, not that one a commission of omission. In fact, even today, there's nothing that comes out of from that. It's just say SABS needs to be trained. SABS were trained. I mean, you cannot be a policeman without being trained, or a policewoman without being trained. What more training do you need? But at the end of the day, even today, we don't know what happened. It was an absolute waste of state funds.
A waste of state funds, you agree with that?
Look, the colleague makes it more easier. Reality of this matter is that had it not be because there are internal politics in the NUM, we were not to be where we are. Reality again in this thing is to say South African mines, majority of them are not owned by South Africans. That's why we have got blacks who are representing the jackets of people who are playing golf overseas. Reality of Africans is for us to unite. You have seen it, you have been doing it in gold with Comrade Matunjwa and his people. We are saying to those who are stealing from the poor, who continue to abuse our people, they must hold it not to set, because the unity of the working class is the thing that will definitely do away with all these complaints that we hear from our members. Yes, mistakes happen, but we need to close some of the chapters and look forward as a strong force. And come tomorrow, we'll be together in the celebration. This is what we agreed upon.
I'm listening to the two of you gentlemen. You've smoked the peace pipe then. You're fine. We're not where we were in 2012.
Well, you can see when we live here. He came, he found me here. I saw him coming there. There were a number of people. There is nothing like what it has. And I can tell you, since we took over leadership, there's never been this torrential crime of workers being killed in the buy stop and all this, which is shaking those who are stealing from the poor, because immediately we remain united with AMCO. Watch the space.
So let's then talk very briefly, Mr. Manyathi. This now, I mean, in 2012, we saw a different picture. NUM and AMCO were at loggerheads. Now, fast forward, you're moving to say that tomorrow you'll be together at the commemoration. In 30 seconds, how is this going to help you in the fight for members?
Yeah, just a correction here. When the strike started, workers has never been against NUM. We were against the employer because we wanted money. And that must be very clear, because somebody then created the narrative that the fight was between NUM and AMCO. It's never been that.
What about the songs that were directed at NUM at the time, and the workers saying that they did not want it? I mean, I was there. I would hear songs like "Le Namsi Zaibulala Kanjani," "Le Namsi Aizonda." Surely that's not towards the employer.
Please don't forget that. NAM was the majority union there before AMCO came on board. In 2012, when AMCO came there, he had no bargaining rights, and that must be very clear. The majority of workers that actually went on strike there
were NUM members.
Even myself was an NUM member at that time. So, in fact, the anger, it was NUM members angry at the way they were treated by their own organization. AMCO grew later on. It had already had members at the side of career. But so the fight has never been about anything.
We're almost out of time. Pardon me for coming in there. In 20 seconds then, how does this unity now help to ensure that your members as unions are then assisted in their quest for whatever they're fighting for when it comes to their rights?
As organized labor, our strength is in our numbers. We have to identify the enemy. The enemy is the employer, the exploiter that continue to exploit us. Where we normally differ is when some of the unions, they don't see what we see to say, look, the enemy is actually dealing with us. Like when it comes to fatals, it doesn't choose whether you belong to NUM or AMCO. If they are safe and unsafe working standard, regardless of the color of the skin, but what we know, or the color of the t-shirt that you actually wear. But what we actually know is that if we stand together and identify programs which will advance the struggle of the workers for a better living wage, we stand a better chance. But if we fight each other, then the enemy will stand aloof and watch.
And how do you ensure, as Sibanye, that you do not see a repeat of 2012?
I think if we learn from the past, never forget it, and make sure that when we see that we are reaching a point of no return, we return to the basic principle of Ubuntu, where we can disagree, but we must do it in such a way that takes us forward. I think that's the only way we can ensure that we don't repeat.
Are we, as a country, Andries, in a space where we say we can avoid another Marikana? We'll never see what happened in August 2012 happen again in this country?
I think for as long as politicians hold shares in mining operations, we still have interests of people that reside around the mining areas being looked down on simply because the more shareholders would earn, the lesser communities are supposed to be taking out of this. So it's a catch-22 situation. In my view, there's still safety insofar as making sure that something like Marikana should happen. But we would sit and have conclusions from commissions like Falam, where blame has only been put on the shoulders of one individual, Ria Pierre. And to my view, that needs to be reviewed simply because it was as a result of a toxic collusion between state and capital that the massacre took place. So I think for as long as the circumstances still exist, and to this day I can tell you now, they still do exist. So there's still possibility that something like Marikana could happen.
Let's end off there, and I wish I had more time with you tonight, but thank you to you all for coming and really being patient with us this evening. Thank you. We do appreciate your time. That is Philip Vilagazi, NUM Deputy President, AMCU Regional Secretary Ubaputuma Manyati, Tapsile Puma, Executive Vice President, Stakeholder Relations at Sibanye Stillwater, and Rhys Nkume, Attorney for the Marikana miners. And this is where we're going to leave it tonight. But before we do that, remember that the people who died in Marikana were family members, they were breadwinners, they were fathers. They themselves had hopes and dreams for their own families and their children. They had names, and we are leaving you now with their names, just so you get to know who these victims were. From us, good evening.